power, perks, and much better salaries. But sadly, it is true that we all have heard about some corrupt bureaucrats as well. So there are flaws in the system, and these flaws relate very much to matters of corruption. And there are many practices in the wider society. We've seen this. Business people who are not averse to paying bribes to get certain out-of-turn favors, to get some licenses processed or customs dues cleared or goods pushed through, or whatever it may be. Somehow bribes and corruption have become part of the lubricants of our society. Now, I say this with a great deal of regret. I don't quite know how to solve it. I mean, I think one thing might have been had good old Anna Hazare, instead of just focusing all his energies on a Lokpal bill, which will simply create an additional bureaucracy, if he had simply urged everyone at every one of his rallies to take a solemn oath never to give or receive a bribe, maybe that would have actually made a dent, because the truth is that for every corrupt transaction there is a giver and a taker. So if all of us refuse to give, then what will people take? It's always because somebody is willing to give that the takers are able to take. And you know, when there are three businessmen competing for the same contract, and one businessman says, if I bribe the chap who's making the decision, I'll get the contract, and the other two say, no, we'll be honest, then honesty doesn't pay. And then all three of them start becoming corrupt. These are part of the real challenges we have to live with in our country. I think it's going to be a gradual process. I'm hoping you will live in a less corrupt India, as, for example, technology comes in, and we can get more and more transactions done through legal digital means. If money can move in ways that are obviously accountable because they're going through computers, they're going through bank accounts, if the need or ability to either give or receive or generate black money is reduced, all of these things could simplify and reduce corruption. But it'll take time, and certainly I am hoping that all of you will grow up into a cleaner India. In the meantime, I would not urge you to be discouraged or disillusioned, even though disillusionment can come easily in these situations. I would urge you instead to say, no, let me enter the system because it's the only system we have, and let me try and change it for the better in whatever ways I can.
Sir, as you have been a part of the United Nations for 29 years, I would like to ask you, what reforms do you suggest, especially in the Security Council of UN?
Well, you know, there are a lot of reforms, in fact, that when I was there, Kofi Annan, as Secretary General, was able to push through. But there's some things that are beyond the capacity of a Secretary General, and certainly something like the Security Council has to be decided by all the member states. Now, the Security Council is a body which has two kinds of members. There are non-permanent members, of which there are 10, and then there are permanent members, 5 of them, who are the most powerful members in the Security Council because they get to veto anything they don't agree with. So they are the most powerful ones, and these 5 are the ones who are deemed to be the victors of World War II, namely the US, Russia, or the Soviet Union as it used to be, Britain, France, and China. China's claims to victory are slightly hollow, but I understand that they felt they had to have an Asian country, and India was still not independent, so China was given it. Now, if you look at these 5 countries, some of them remain extremely important players. Some of them went through a period, as China did, of not being very important, but are now again important. Some are going through an increasing decline. Britain and France are no longer the great powers whose empires straddled the world as they did at that time. And therefore, history has moved on. And yet these 5 exercise this disproportionate power because they happen to have won a war 70 years ago. And that's not a good enough reason anymore for an arrangement in the 21st century, because it's something you accomplished in 1945. And therefore, many of us would like to see the Security Council's composition reformed. Reform both in the permanent membership and in the non-permanent, because even if you take the total membership, Europe, with 5% of the world's population today, has 33% of the seats. Why is that? Because, of course, in those days, there were more European countries that were independent. Then, after the decolonization that India started and pioneered, and then all of Asia and all of Africa got decolonized and became members of the UN, and they're not sufficiently adequately represented in the Security Council. And then the other challenge we have, of course, is how do we pick which countries will come into a reformed body? How large should that body be? Because many people say if it's too large, it won't be efficient. And that 15 is already large enough, and maybe you can push it to 20 or 21, but if you add the aspirations of all those who want to join, you'll get a very large and unwieldy body. So a number has to be agreed upon, and then a mechanism to choose. So when we say, for example, that India has an obvious claim, we do have an obvious claim. We are the world's third largest economy in PPP, purchasing power terms. We are obviously a major contributor to the UN, peacekeeping operations, the Democracy Fund, our own staff and personnel. We've been a big supporter of the UN many years. So we feel we've earned the right to have a permanent seat at the high table, the Security Council. But our neighbors obviously will fight tooth and nail to deny that to us. And it's not entirely sure that our other big neighbors, the Chinese, will be terribly happy, though they've not opposed it personally. Meanwhile, the Chinese are busy opposing Japan, which is actually the second largest financial contributor to the UN. And so it goes. I can give you example after example. In fact, when Japan and Germany were first calling for UN reform, the Italians said, what's all this talk about Japan and Germany? After all, we lost the war too. So they said, if you guys lost the Second World War and now you want to be at the top, why can't we also ask the same thing? So it goes like this, and I think it's very important for us to recognize that the reason this reform is necessary is because the organization at its top decision-making level has to be more representative in order to be more legitimate. And it has to include everyone. The truth is that in the world, where there is a high table and there is not, you're either at the table or you're on the menu. And in the case of India, we have for a very long time been a rule taker in the international system. We feel we're now ready to join the rule makers. And that difference is something that lies behind our desire to see Security Council reform. Young lady there. Oh, you got a question, sorry.
Sir, as Indians, I think we all love to believe that India, like you said, deserves a seat at the high table. Unfortunately, we haven't seen India being granted that. So as someone who's been familiar with that international arena, you've been Minister of External Affairs, you've worked in the UN. Realistically speaking, where do you think India's space in international politics and international economics lies? Yeah.
Well, that's a subject of a much longer lecture, my dear. But I'll try and give you the short answer, which is that I think India is actually extremely well positioned to have an important role in international affairs for a number of reasons, which is obviously to do with our size, the size of our economy, the numbers in our population, all of that, but also the contribution that we can make to a number of these issues. I've often argued that if you look at the whole issue of managing the global commons, that is the common system of the world, on everything from cyberspace to outer space, we have in India the expertise, the talent, the resources, the human capital available to actually make a major worldwide contribution. So on cyberspace, we have led the internet revolution in many ways in the developing world in the 90s onwards. Outer space, we are one of the handful of countries that has a highly developed rocket and satellite program. But what is more, we are the only country in the world to have actually successfully sent an orbiter into Mars orbit on our first attempt. No country's done it. The US couldn't do it on the first attempt. Britain couldn't. France couldn't. The Chinese and Japanese have failed. They still haven't managed to get anything orbiting Mars, and we've done it. So when you think about all that, we are not an inconsiderable player. I often tell people, when you think about these various international groupings you read about in the newspapers. So in India, our foreign minister meets every year with her counterparts from Russia and China in something called RIC. Then she adds the Brazilians and the South Africans, and she has meetings of BRICS. Then she'll take out the Russians and the Chinese, and she'll have a meeting with the others in what's called IBSA, for South-South cooperation. And then to IBSA, she'll add the Chinese, but not the Russians, and she gets BASIC for environmental negotiations. And the interesting thing about all of these is India is the only country that's a member of all of these groupings, and not merely because our name happens to begin with that most useful element in any acronym, a vowel, but because we actually have something to offer each of these groupings, and they in turn need us for each of these groupings to be credible. So as you can see, I believe we have a great role to play in the world.
Sir, we have a lot of aspiring politicians and parliamentarians sitting in the audience today. So what piece of advice would you give to these aspiring politicians and parliamentarians?
Well, I think it's the same advice I'd give any young person in life, which is never give up, because honestly, life is full of setbacks. You can ask me, I've had a few. But the main thing is to believe enough in yourself to carry on. Second, and linked to that in many ways, is follow your bliss. You went to Vasant Valley, so I'm assuming you all have parents enlightened enough not to tell you to do what you don't want to do. So if you can't stand the thought of science and they want you to be a doctor and engineer, I hope you'll be as lucky as I was when I had to make that choice. And I hope that above all, you will live up to yourself. You know, I've often told young people this, that the one thing that no one can control, the one thing that no one can impose on you or take away from you is your ability to be yourself. Every one of us has some qualities, some talents, some special ability. It may simply be to make others laugh. It may be to make others smile. It may be to love, to give. It may be, of course, to come first in class or win the 100-meter dash, whatever it may be. We each have some capacity. And if we can bring out the best in ourselves, work hard enough, and make enough of an effort so that we can actually live up to our own best potential. If we can do all that, and don't forget, nobody can be a better you than you yourself. If you can just do that for yourself, I believe the results will be that you will succeed and you will make a difference to everyone around you. Ultimately, I've always believed that, we're on this planet to make a difference. There's no point, you sit around puzzling out the mysteries of life and the purpose of why we've been dropped here and what we're supposed to do and so on. I don't really see that answer as the spiritual leaders do in some otherworldly afterlife realization or oneness with the Godhead. I think what really matters is the world into which we're born. And if we can leave the place around us better for us having been in it, better in a small way, in a big way. Not every one of us can be a prime minister. Not every one of us can be a secretary general of the United Nations. Whatever thing we do, whatever profession we pursue, whatever life we lead, if we can lead it well enough, with enough integrity, enough commitment to ourselves and what we're capable of, and if we can, as a result, make whatever little corner of the world is ours better for us having been there, we will have led a good, worthwhile life, whether as a parliamentarian or a politician, or as a businessman, or as a journalist, or anything else you want to do. The principle, I think, applies to anything you'll do. So good luck in what you do, and all the best.
Thank you, Dr. Tharoor, for joining us today and sharing with us your memories and your journey as a politician and a diplomat. We all loved what you had to say, and I'm sure we all learned a lot. We would like to offer you a token of our appreciation.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers that took our time from their busy schedules in order to be with us today. Needless to say, all of us have learned a lot today and will be leaving this auditorium feeling inspired and ready to take on the outside world. Because that is what Voices in Vasant Valley is all about. I would also like to thank all the students, the technology department, the art department, external council members for making this event successful. I hope everyone had a great time, and thank you for being a great audience and making our dream of Voices become reality.
All the guests can now proceed outside, and all the Vasant Valley students should remain seated. Thank you.